Hello, Year 8, and welcome to Rivers Lesson 3. So in this lesson we're going to look at river processes. What I'm currently on now is the document that is attached to show my homework with the instructions on what you need to do. Okay, so a couple of options for you. I'm going to go through a PowerPoint slide in a minute explaining all the different river processes in more detail. If you want to, whilst I'm going through explaining, you can complete the tasks. So there's one for each of the river processes, and that'll make sense as I go through them in the PowerPoint. Or you can watch the whole clip and then do them afterwards. You should be able to pause it at different times as well. So you might be able to watch a little bit of it, pause it, and then complete a task. It's up to you how you do it, but they are the tasks that you need to complete for this lesson on river processes. So over to what we're going to do about in this lesson. So like I said, today it's river processes. I thought I'd start with a little bit of a picture task. So the 5 W's and how as well. So in this image here, I want to have a quick think. So you might be able to, you should pause the video, maybe a little think about in the picture what has happened, maybe why has it happened, when did this happen, who is being affected by what's gone on in this picture, maybe where is this, and I guess how is very similar to why it happened as well, but how did it happen? Okay, so maybe have a quick think about that, and maybe pause the video, and then I'll go through each of them in a moment. Right, hopefully you've had time to think about those there. So what happened here? So for what happened in this picture, the river, as you can see there, kind of more of a stream really, but the river at some point during a flood obviously had much more water in it, and what's happened is that the road on the right hand side here in the picture has kind of just eroded away and it's collapsed down into the river. Okay, that's the what. Why did this happen? So there was a massive flood in this area, and so much water was going down this stream that it caused all underneath the road, the foundations of the road, to be worn away, to be eroded, and for it to basically just be undermined and for it to collapse. When did this happen? So this happened in Storm Desmond in 2015. Where did it happen? This happened in the Lake District between Grasmere and Keswick, and obviously who it was affecting is the people that needed to commute between those two towns in the Lake District. Okay, so I think I've already addressed how as well. So moving on with what we're going to do today, and it's linked into what's going on in this picture, because this picture is showing lots of erosion going on during a flood, but we're going to focus on erosion maybe in normal times as well. So river processes. A process is a method that results in a change in a physical object. So the physical object being the land around a river or the river itself. So rivers do 3 main processes. The first one is erosion, so where rocks are worn away and the land changes shape. The second one, transportation, where eroded material is carried by the river downstream. And 3, deposition, where transported material is dropped when the river loses energy, such as when it enters the sea. So these 3 things, these 3 processes, they happen at different points along the river. At different points in a river, there might be more erosion going on than there is transportation. There might be more deposition going on than what there is erosion transportation. And that's what we're going to look at in future lessons as well. Today we're going to focus on what these 3 processes are, and we're going to look at how they kind of act differently. So what types of erosion have we got? What types of transportation have we got? And when does deposition happen in a river? So we'll start with that first one there. We'll start with erosion. So the types of erosion. So erosion where rocks are worn away and the land changes shape. So there's 4 types of erosion we're going to look at. And your first task for you to complete for this lesson is to draw a diagram similar to this one here on your screen. Okay. but I do want you to add maybe a little bit more detail on what's on here in terms of what do these 4 words actually mean. So that's what I'm going to go explain and talk to you about now. So the first one we're going to look at is hydraulic action, pointing at this here on the diagram. So hydraulic action, this is the sheer power of the water as it smashes against the riverbanks. Air becomes trapped in the cracks of the riverbank and bed and causes the rock to break apart. So you've got to imagine in the river, in some areas, the water will be flowing extremely, extremely quickly. The force of that water and the weight of that water pressing up against the riverbank could cause it to break apart. It doesn't happen immediately, but over maybe a series of years, it breaks up that riverbank until it collapses. In flood events, it can happen overnight, like we saw at that picture at the start. So hydraulic action, this happens in areas where the water is travelling really quickly and it's got lots of power behind it as well. So you've got to think about whereabouts in the river might that happen. It needs lots of water, but that water needs to move in quickly as well. So hydraulic action, that's that first type of erosion, that water breaking up the riverbanks. Right, the next one, abrasion. So abrasion, when pebbles grind along the riverbank and bed in a sandpapering effect. So yeah, I've got a picture of some sandpaper there. So it's basically the rocks. I've got some rocks here from my garden. The rocks will be kind of if that's the riverbed, the rocks that are being carried in the river will scrape along the riverbed over time, and it will scratch away at those rocks. Okay, and over time that will become much smoother, as you can see in that picture there. So you can see there that's been scraped away by the rocks in the river, and that is abrasion. So abrasion, basically a sandpaper effect, but over time it does wear away the rock as well and not just smooth it out. Third one, attrition. When rocks that the river is carrying knock against each other, they break apart to become smaller and more rounded. This is an important one. So, got these rocks again. If these rocks are travelling down the river next to each other and they bump into each other again and again and again, eventually they might break apart. What also happens though is that they become smoother. You'll notice here that I've got 2 kind of quite smooth rocks in my hand. However, they don't always start like this. Usually, they will start quite jagged, okay? Not very smooth shape at all. But then over time, as they travel further down the river, they become much smoother, kind of like this, okay? So that's what attrition is. Right, they're the 3 main ones, and the last one is something we can't really see. Okay, so the last one is solution. So this is when the water dissolves certain types of rock, limestone being kind of one of those types of rock that gets easily dissolved by the water. So we can't really see this happen, but the water will dissolve some of these minerals in the rock and make the rock weaker, and then it kind of erodes it. Okay, so just a bit of a recap. What you need to do is you need to draw a diagram similar to this one, and I want you to add a little bit more detail to it using the information on these slides here. Okay, so hopefully you can pause it at the different points in the video so you can kind of have time to look over the definitions in a bit more detail as well. So that is erosion. That's our first process. So we've kind of covered that one now. So they're the 4 types of erosion, and that's the first thing that happens in these river processes. The rocks are broken down, the riverbanks are broken down, so we're left with lots of material. Okay, so we're left with lots of little pebbles, little bits of sediment. That rock and that sediment needs to be moved somewhere now, and that process is called transportation. So where eroded material is carried by the river downstream. That's what needs to happen next. So with the same as what we did for erosion there, we're now going to look at what transportation is. Okay, so what is transportation? just going back to what your task is for this, task 2, write definitions for the 4 types of transportation. Okay, so that's what I want you to do based on transportation. So transportation, we might think of it as how we get around, so we might go on a train, boat or car. In terms of rivers, this is how the rocks are transported along the river. Okay, so we've got a few, again, there's 4 different types of transportation that happen in a river, and I'm just going to talk through them now. So this first one is suspension. So suspension, very simple. The smallest rocks, the really ones that aren't particularly heavy, they will simply be carried in the river, so they will be suspended. Okay, as you can see, kind of got some people in some hammocks there, and that is a suspension bridge there. So they are suspended. They're not rolling on the riverbed, and they're not kind of getting stuck on the riverbed or the riverbanks. They're inside the water, kind of being suspended by it. So that is the first one, suspension. The next one is solution. So we've already come across this word already, solution, but for erosion, but it's also a type of transportation as well, which is really important. When that material is being dissolved into the water, it continues to be transported by it. Okay, and it's carried further downstream. The third one, traction. So traction, this is when the bigger rocks, or maybe ones like this size or bigger, they are too heavy for the water to pick up and carry, so they are rolled along the riverbed. Okay, so they're too heavy to carry, so they're rolled along the riverbed. We call that one traction. And the last one, and this is really commonly mistaken for solution, because salt is something that dissolves, isn't it? But saltation isn't salt being dissolved in water. Saltation is when the pebbles in the river bounce along the riverbed. Okay, so they bounce on the riverbed, and that is that 4th type of transportation. So if I just put them all on one diagram now, this is what they'll all kind of look like. So suspension, fine sediment is carried as suspension in the water. This is what makes water look dirty. Okay, so when you go past a river and you think, oh, that's a really dirty river, sometimes the water might actually be quite clean. It's just that it's got lots of sand and stuff being suspended in it. 2, solution. Dissolved material is carried along and you can't see it. Okay, so it's kind of invisible. It's been as you can see in that diagram. Okay. 3, traction. Bigger pebbles and cobbles are rolled along it says seabed there. It should say riverbed. Saltation. Small pebbles move when one pebble hits another, making it bounce. This bouncing sets up a chain reaction. They kind of knock into each other and they transport along the river. So that's erosion and transportation done now. So we've done both of those. We've talked about how the rocks are broken up. We've talked about how they're transported down the river. The final thing that happens now is deposition, where transported material is dropped when the river loses energy, such as when it enters the sea. So that is this last process we're going to look at to kind of wrap up what we've done with the river processes. So deposition. This river process happens when a river slows down and has less energy. The material that was being transported is then dropped. Larger rocks are dropped first and finer materials are dropped later. So that's all to do with the weight of them. Okay. If something's really heavy, it's going to be dropped much sooner. If it's really light, it's going to travel a long way. So your task for deposition is a question. So the question I want you to answer is, describe when the process of deposition happens. So deposition, the process of rocks being dropped off, happens because of 4 main things. The gradient of the river, or the volume of water, decreases. Okay, so the gradient being how steep that river is. Okay, if the river goes down to really flat land, then those rocks, those things that are being transported, are going to drop. 2, the water slows down on the inside bend in the river. So you can see in this picture here, the inside bend has got this kind of big beach on. That's because on the inside bend, the water moves slower than it does on the outside. Okay, and that's something we'll go into much more detail on when we look at these different features of a river. The third one, the river channel becomes shallower. Okay, if it becomes shallower, there's an opportunity for deposition to happen. And 4, the river enters a lake or the sea. So basically, as soon as all that water is going through that really kind of relatively narrow space with all those rocks and sand in, when it opens up into a massive ocean or a massive lake, then it's got much more space, and then all that velocity of the water disappears and the rocks will fall to the bottom. Okay, they will be deposited. So what we've got here now is we've got this cycle of erosion, transportation and deposition. Okay, it's something that never stops in a river. At any point in a river, there will be one of these, at least one of these things going on. Okay, there'll be at least some erosion happening. There'll probably definitely be some transportation, and in some cases there'll be some deposition. So there's always one of these processes happening in a river. Right, let's look through some pictures now. So, why is no deposition happening here? So you can see in this picture there is a waterfall. If you're thinking about a waterfall, that water falling off there is moving extremely quickly. There's going to be no chance for any sediment or rocks to kind of be dropped off. Okay. In this picture, we might get some deposition around these areas here where it's kind of a bit slower, the water. But if you're thinking about the waterfall, no deposition can happen there. What we will get though is lots of erosion, because that water there is moving quite quickly and it's going to cause more damage to the rocks around it, as you can already see what might have actually happened. Next picture. Where and why is deposition happening in this image? So this image is a bend in the river, and we also call this bend in the river a meander. Okay, so looking at this meander here, you can see that the inside bend is where we've got lots of sand, and that's where we're getting all this deposition going on. Okay, because on the inside bend it's much slower. On the outside bend of a river, it is much quicker, the way that water travels. What you've got to imagine is that, for example, if somebody's running on a running track, if they're on the inside bend and somebody's on the outside bend, they set off at the same time on the same line, and they go around the running track and they get back at the same time. Who has travelled quicker? It will be the person that's on that outside lane, because they've got to cover more distance. It's the same in a river. The outside of the bend will always have the water moving quicker, and you can see on there, that's where we're getting erosion. On this side, that's where we're getting deposition. That is something I will explain in much more detail in a later lesson. This is an aerial photograph. Why is deposition happening here? As you can see, it's quite difficult to see, but the river is kind of going through there and there as well, and then it enters the sea here. And you can see on this aerial photo, all of that sediment and sand that's being carried all the way along the river is now being deposited just in this area here in the sea. So, does anyone know the name of this river? So some of you might know. This is the Mississippi River in the United States of America. So this is actually being deposited in the Gulf of Mexico. All this sediment that's been collected is now being deposited in the Gulf of Mexico. So that's why deposition happens there. So now we've covered all of those 3 river processes: erosion, transportation, and deposition. So, like I said before, they happen at any point in the river. One of these processes will be happening. Okay. Right, I'm going to very quickly, just before I finish this lesson, link it to what we did in the previous lesson. So in the previous lesson, we looked at the long profile. We looked at the upper course of the river, the middle course, and the lower course. So when we think about what we've looked at today, when we think about erosion, transportation, deposition, in the upper course, the erosion, transportation, and deposition, which happens up here, is going to be very different to the types which happen down here. In the upper course, we might have more hydraulic action happening in terms of erosion. we might have more abrasion because there's more bigger rocks scraping against the riverbed and riverbank. However, in the upper course, it's unlikely that we're going to have deposition of small bits of sand and sediment because they don't have that there in the upper course yet. What will be deposited will be the bigger kind of rocks, okay? In comparison to that, in the lower course, where it's really wide and flat, the what type of erosion we're going to have here is probably more to do with kind of solution. Maybe we'll have some kind of attrition as well, where there's smaller rocks bumping into each other. And in terms of transportation, in the lower course, that's where we'll see the water starting to look a bit mucky because it's transporting those little bits of sand. Whereas in the upper course, the water always looks really clean, okay, because it doesn't have those little bits of sand in it. In the lower course, usually it looks quite dirty, and that's because it's suspending lots of little bits of sand. So that's how what we've done today links into the previous lesson. Okay, I hope that kind of makes some sense. So just to recap what you need to do now for your kind of task. Some of you might have been doing it as you've gone along with the video. First thing you've got to do is draw a diagram to show the different types of erosion. So that is drawing a diagram similar to this one here. Okay, maybe add some extra detail from those other slides. The second task I want you to do is write definitions for the 4 types of transportation. So you can use this information there to help you with that one. Task 3 is a question. Describe when the process of deposition happens. So you could use these 2 slides here. And the 4th one, which is not on the slide, but a bit of a task for you to do. I want you to research, find out 10 facts about the River Severn. Okay, so River Severn is a river in the UK on the British Isles. So I don't want to tell you any more information. I want to find out 10 facts, please, about the River Severn. And then, as always, there will be a quiz to follow what you've done about in this lesson. I want to say one thing now, though. Please upload your work before doing the quiz. I've had quite a lot of people. I post the quiz on, and then within half an hour, people have completed the quiz. That shouldn't be the case. You should be completing these tasks first and then doing the quiz after you've done these 4 tasks. The quiz is more of a check for me to see if you understand what you've done and if you've done it correctly. Because if you've done it correctly, you should be getting 100% on the first attempt. Whereas what I'm seeing is people doing it without doing any of the lesson, and then they get 80% after 3 attempts. So please complete the 4 tasks first and then do the quiz. Okay? If you've got any questions, if you're stuck on anything, you can ask me on Show My Homework, but only if you're really stuck with something. Hope this has been helpful, and hope you continue to enjoy your time off. Okay? Thank you.